The supernatural aspect of the offense is coupled with a crime in the modern sense in response to the demand for rationality that is characteristic of a time in which belief in magic is dwindling. The important detail is the fact that it is poisoning, a crime that deprives the accused of any legal protection just as bluntly as any accusation directly involving magic. Poisoning is so easy to conceal, especially for a doctor, that it is impossible to prove the crime, and therefore there is no need to prove it. This brings us back to all our examples at once. It contains features which recall the myth of Oedipus, others which remind us of Guillaume de Machat and all the persecuted Jews, and still others which are reminiscent of the false myth I concocted to historicize that of Oedipus and demonstrate that the decision to define a text as historical or mythological is arbitrary. Because of the historical context, we automatically demystify it with a psychosociological interpretation. We sense a cabal organized by jealous rivals, and we immediately lose awareness of those aspects that remind us of the sacred in mythology. Lopez, like Oedipus and like Apollo himself, is both master of life and master of death, for he controls this terrible plague, the sickness. One moment Lopez miraculously dispenses cures, the next no less miraculously sickness, which is within his capability to cure if he so pleases. It is inevitable that the historical requirements of the text remind us of the sort of interpretation that is considered blasphemous and almost inconceivable in mythology, particularly Greek mythology. Presented in the form of myth, it becomes a powerful symbol of the human condition, of the heights and depths of destiny. How the humanists rejoice. Put the story in an Elizabethan setting, and it is nothing more than a sordid palace scandal, typical of the frenzied ambitions, hypocritical violence, and superstition that are rife only in the modern Western world. The second vision is certainly more accurate than the first, but still not entirely so, given that a remnant of unconscious persecution still plays a role in the Lopez affair. No allowance is made for this. What is more, a shadow is cast on our historical universe by presenting real crimes against a false background of Rousseau-like innocence of which it alone is deprived. Behind the warrior gods, there are always victims, and victims are usually linked to medicine, just as in the case of the Jews, the same men who denounce the witches go to them for help. All persecutors attribute to their victims both the capacity to do harm and its reverse. All aspects of mythology can be found in a less extreme form in medieval persecutions. This is true in the case of the monstrous, which can be easily recognized if the effort is made to compare phenomena that, out of ignorance, have been considered incomparable. The confusion of animals and men provides mythology with its most important and spectacular modality of the monstrous. The confusion of animals and men provides mythology with its most important and spectacular modality of the monstrous. The same confusion can be found in medieval victims. Sorcerers and witches are thought to have a particular affinity with the goat, an extremely evil animal. During the trials, suspects' feet are examined to see if they are cloven. Their foreheads are tapped for any trace of a horn. The gradual disappearance of the borderline between animal and man in those who are marked as victims is an important concept. If the alleged witch possesses a pet, a cat, a dog, or a bird, she is immediately thought to resemble that animal, and the animal itself seems almost an incarnation, a temporary embodiment or a useful disguise to ensure the success of certain enterprises. These animals play exactly the same role as Jupiter's swan in the seduction of Leda, or the bull with Pasiphae. We are distracted from the resemblance by the extremely negative connotations of monstrosity in the medieval world, which are almost always positive in later mythology and in our modern conception of mythology. During recent centuries, writers, artists, and even contemporary anthropologists have completed the process of mitigation and criticism begun in the so-called classical era. I will return to this later. The almost mythological figure of the old witch is a good example of the tendency to merge moral and physical monstrosities that was mentioned in our discussion of mythology. She is lame and bandy-legged, and her face is covered with warts and various excretions that emphasize its ugliness. Everything about her attracts persecution. The same was clearly true for the Jews in medieval and modern anti-Semitism. All that is needed is a number of victim signs centered in a group of individuals who then become the target for the majority. The Jew is also thought to be connected with the goat and certain other animals. The concept of the suppression of differences between man and animal reappears in this context in an unexpected form. In 1575, for example, the illustrated Wunderzeitung of Johann Fischart of Binswangen, near Augsburg, shows a Jewish woman contemplating two little pigs to whom she has just given birth. Trachtenberg, The Devil and the Jews, pages 52 to 53. Although this type of thing is found throughout world mythology, the similarity eludes us because the scapegoat mechanism is not functioning within the same order in the two cases, and the social result cannot be compared. The higher order of mythology ends with the victim becoming sacred, thereby concealing from us, and in some cases totally eliminating, the distortions of persecution. Let us look at a myth that is very important throughout the northwest of Canada and an area around the Arctic Circle. It is the original myth of the Dogrib Indians. I will quote Roger Bastide's summary of it in the volume Ethnologie Générale of the Encyclopédie de la Pléiade, page 1065. Quote, a woman has intercourse with a dog and gives birth to 6 puppies. Her tribe banishes her and she is forced to hunt for her own food. One day as she returns from the bush, she discovers that the puppies are children and that they shed their animal skins the moment she leaves the house. So she pretends to leave, and when her children are, as it were, undressed, she takes their skins away, forcing them to keep their human identity from now on. End of quote. All the stereotypes of persecution we have identified exist in this story, though they are somewhat difficult to distinguish. Even their fusion is revealing. The general loss of differences that I term crisis is indicated here in the mother's hesitation between human and dog, and that same hesitation is seen in the children who represent the community. The fact that she is a woman is the stereotypical victim sign, and the stereotypical crime is bestiality. The woman is certainly responsible for the crisis since she gives birth to a monstrous community. But the myth tacitly admits the truth. There is no difference between the woman criminal and the community. Both are undifferentiated, and the community existed before the crime, since it is the community that punishes the crime. This is therefore an example of a scapegoat accused of a stereotypical crime and treated accordingly. Her tribe banishes her and she is forced to hunt for her own food. We don't recognize the connection with the Jewish woman from Binswangen accused of giving birth to pigs because the scapegoat mechanism is at work throughout and becomes fundamental. It turns into something positive. That is why the community exists both before and after the crime it is punishing. It is born of this crime, not of its monstrosity, which is temporary in nature, but of its humanity, which is well defined. Thanks to the scapegoat, who is at first accused of causing the community to vacillate between human and animal, the difference between the two is permanently settled. The woman dog becomes a great goddess who punishes not only bestiality, but also incest and all other stereotypical crimes, all infractions of society's fundamental rules. The apparent cause of disorder becomes the apparent cause of order because she is a victim who rebuilds the terrified unity of a grateful community, at first in opposition to her and finally around her. There are 2 stages in myths, but interpreters have failed to distinguish them. The first is the act of accusing a scapegoat who is not yet sacred, to whom all evil characteristics adhere. Then comes the second stage, when he is made sacred by the community's reconciliation. I have succeeded in identifying this first stage by means of its equivalent in historical texts that reflect the perspective of the persecutor. These texts are all the more appropriate for guiding an interpreter toward this first stage because they are almost exclusively limited to it. Texts of persecution indicate that myths comprise a first transfiguration similar to that of our persecutors that is really only the substructure of the second transfiguration. Mythological persecutors, more credulous than their historical equivalents, are so taken with what is accomplished by their scapegoats that they are truly reconciled, and their fear of the victim and hostility toward him are supplemented by adoration. It is difficult to understand this second transfiguration, which is almost no equivalent in our universe. But once it has been clearly distinguished from the first, it can be analyzed logically, beginning with the differences between the 2 types of texts being compared, especially in the conclusion. Finally, I have confirmed the accuracy of this analysis of establishing that the faint traces of the sacred still clinging to historical victims bear too close a resemblance to the vanished forms of the sacred for them to have evolved from an independent mechanism. Collective violence must therefore be recognized as a mechanism that is still creating myths in our universe, but for reasons we shall learn more about, is functioning less and less well. The second of the 2 The second of the two mythical transfigurations is obviously the most fragile, since it has almost entirely disappeared. Modern Western history is characterized by the decay of mythic forms that only survive as phenomena of persecution and are almost entirely limited to the first transfiguration. If the mythological distortion is directly proportional to the belief of the persecutors, this decline might well constitute the other side of our growing yet imperfect ability to decode. This ability to decode began with the decomposition of the sacred and then developed into our ability to read the partially decomposed forms. And our ability grows. As our ability grows, we are encouraged to go back to the forms that are still intact and decode the meaning of real myths.